Administrator for this. I just want to welcome everybody and thank you all for coming and for everybody's hard work and everybody's volunteering. So we really appreciate that. I'm going to start with a word of prayer and then we'll get just some details out of the way. Thank you, God, for your great goodness to us. Thank you for the rain, even though it was a hardship for people. Just thank you that you're watering the earth and making everything green and beautiful and making things grow. God, I pray that you would just give everybody peace in their hearts. We're here. We made it. Help the kids remember what they remember. Help them to be clear-headed. And help us just remember that really the point of all this is to learn and to bring glory to you. And just pray that you would guide our morning. Just help us have a really memorable, wonderful day. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay. Just in case anybody doesn't know, the restrooms are through these doors and to the right, and it's the first two doors. We have the Peoria area team is this team right here, and they're going to be defense first. And then this team up here is the prosecuting team, and they're from Davenport, Rock Island. And they're going to prosecute first, and then we're going to have an intermission, and they're going to switch roles. So kind of the overarching point of doing this and the mission of this, of CC, is to know God and make him known. And students practice their growing mastery of classical skills by learning the details, asking questions about their material, really all the subjects that they study, not just law here. Connecting details into a strategy, preparing a persuasive argument, employing clear reasoning, and presenting without a script. They get an inside view of the judicial system, and they get a sobering sense of how poor choices lead to consequences that restrict freedom. So each of the students has a role to play, and they will earn points for their team, and these people in the jury will be giving them points based on how well they perform their role and how convincingly they act as witnesses. So the actual verdict is not really important here. It's how they play their role. People in the audience, you've got special permission to have phones so you can take your pictures, but please put them on mute. And then once you leave this room, I'm pretty sure your phone has to be off because they don't want any photo taking or recording anywhere else in the building. So it's actually special permission that we're able to bring in phones.
There are, excuse me, I don't want to
Yeah,
I didn't mean to interrupt, but there are some chairs in our jury deliberation room. If you, maybe if a couple of the gentlemen could bring some of them out so everybody could have a seat. I don't want somebody standing for 3 hours and then passing out on these.
Yes.
So feel free to, you can put them in the, don't block the whole aisle, but maybe a couple in the aisle, and then feel free to put them around here too. Thank you, Mr. Bailiff. Good work.
Okay. And then protocol is really serious for this mock trial. So there can be, once we start the trial, this bar here separates the audience from the people who are working up here. There can be no communication whatsoever between the audience and the people who are competing up here. So no, gasps, winks, clearing of the throat, faces, just let them do what they need to do, and we'll all sit there. So then, should I have everything? So we're going to begin pretty quick. I want to just congratulate you guys for all of your hard work and for everything that you've learned and that your relationships have been solidified with each other. You've learned how to work as a team. So no matter what the outcome is, you guys have all done fantastic. And you should be very proud of yourselves. I think when we're done with the first round, we'll have an intermission and everybody can relax for about half an hour. Have I, maybe not half an hour, however, did I forget anything? Don't forget.
Our timing just depends on the judges. And even during intermission, the audience is not allowed to interact with the students.
Okay.
And no, once this all starts, we just get to watch until the end of the second trial is over and everything is tallied.
Well, I wish all my trials were like that. You guys want to be a bailiff?
I think that's all I have.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Judge Jody Hoos. Mr. Bailiff, you are 2 for 2 because not only did you help with chairs, but you pronounced my name correctly. So good job. That never happens. I tried to turn the heat down a little bit because I don't know about you guys, but I'm hot. That usually doesn't work, so don't expect it to get a lot cooler here in Texas. But we'll give it a try. Welcome to the students, parents, family members, other siblings that are here. We're very happy to have you on behalf of the 10th Circuit, and I hope it's a pleasant experience for everyone, including the jurors. So we'll do our best to make that pleasant as possible. Okay, would the defendant and his or her attorneys please stand and enter a plea? I'm not sure who the defendant is here.
Your Honor, I plead not guilty.
Okay, thank you. You may be seated. Are there any pretrial motions from the state? No? All right. Any pretrial motions from the defense?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. At this point, then, we will proceed with the trial. Opening statements, then, on behalf of the prosecution. And feel free, if you need to turn that podium to face the jury, feel free to do that, or however you're more comfortable.
May it please the court, Your Honor, and ladies and gentlemen of the jury. My name is Sophia Carey, and this is my co-counsel, Aviana Host. On December 18, 1988, John Walker Barrett was shot 5 times and killed in his own home. The issue in this case today is the premeditated murder of the late John Walker Barrett by his wife, Barbara Allen Barrett. Evidence will show that Mr. Barrett was murdered by Mrs. Barrett through witnesses and documental proof. Joe May will be called as the medical examiner who performed the autopsy on the body of the late Mr. Barrett. Lee Porter will be called as a housekeeper who was present at the time of the incident. C.M. Cheney will be called as a police officer who responded to the alert of this shooting. 16-3-10 South Carolina Code, Murder Defined, states that murder is the killing of another person with malice aforethought, either expressed or implied. Elements of evidence included today are witness Joe May, coroner, has proof of 4 shots to the back of Mr. Barrett and a 5th to the front. Witness Lee Porter, housekeeper, saw and heard Mrs. Barrett following Mr. Barrett with a gun shortly prior to his death. Witness C.M. Cheney, police officer, heard the first confession from Mrs. Barrett that she was not threatened in any way by Mr. Barrett before he was shot. This fulfills the burden of proof beyond reasonable doubt. The state brings a charge of premeditated murder with malice and aforethought against the defendant. The state wishes Mrs. Barrett to be prosecuted within the full extent of the law.
Okay, thank you. Opening statements, then, on behalf of the defense.
May it please the court, Your Honor, and ladies and gentlemen of the jury. My name is Samuel Bell, and these are my co-counsels, Ms. Molly McNutt, Mr. Jace Moody, and Mr. Elijah Peterson. We are here today because Barbara Allen Barrett is a loyal, forgiving wife who did all she could to please her unfaithful husband. And after much provocation and abuse from her beloved spouse, her sense of security was shattered, and she was forced to live in constant fear for her personal well-being. She had no choice but to shoot her husband, because if she had not, she would have been killed herself. The defendant, Barbara Allen Barrett, was being abused by her unfaithful husband. On the night of his death, John Walker Barrett came home late and told Barbara he wanted a divorce. She never knew why and became extremely upset. While she was sitting on the couch, John threatened her with a belt and tried to kill her. She had no choice but to shoot him, otherwise she would have been killed. Our first witness will be Dana McGuire. Dana McGuire is a psychologist. She has interviewed Barbara 3 times and will show how Barbara and John were a battered couple and how Barbara lived in for the loving part of John, but how he was so abusive that he was capable of causing her death. Our second witness is the defendant, Barbara Allen Barrett, who will show how John was going to leave her and how she had no choice but to kill John, because if she did not, she would have killed herself. We are asking that the court find Barbara Allen Barrett not guilty of murder. We ask that the court find Barbara to be a loyal, forgiving wife who did all she could to please her unfaithful husband. Her sense of security was shattered and she was forced to live in constant fear for her personal well-being.
All right, thank you. All right, on to the state's case in chief. Do you have a witness then from the prosecution?
Prosecution would like to call the first prosecution attorney, Joe May.
Confirm that the evidence you shall give to this court and jury in this trial shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Okay, if you could have a seat right here to my left, and the bailiff is going to pull towards you. There you go. And if you could make yourself comfortable once you're situated, please pull that microphone down in front of you. You can close that. Thank you. All right, you may inquire.
What are your qualifications?
I'm a medical doctor and a pathologist.
What was the cause of the death?
A gunshot wound to the back of the head.
How many gunshot wounds are there?
5.
How many gunshot wounds to the back?
2.
In what position was the body when the body was fired? In what position was the body when the fatal shot was fired?
Face down on the floor.
Was the gun in close proximity to the body when any of the shots were fired?
There were no powder marks, which means that the gun had to have been more than 2 feet away.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, cross.
At this time, the defense would like to enter into evidence Exhibit A, record of medical exam.
Is there any objection to the admission of that exhibit?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, that will be admitted. Just set it up there. Thank you.
Please read the highlighted portions in the order they are noted.
Okay. Cause of death, gunshot wound to the head. Manner of death, homicide.
Objection, Your Honor. That is not the right thing. It was not a homicide. On the piece of paper, it says natural.
Okay, maybe you could, let me see your paper. I assume it's the same. So it's a little confusing.
Sorry, natural.
Is it possible for a
Now these are just like my trials.
Is it possible for a gunshot wound to the head to be a natural cause of death?
No.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. You can step down. Is there, do you do redirect? Okay, that's right, I didn't think so. Thank you. You may step down. Another witness from the prosecution.
The prosecution would like to call to the stand second prosecution witness, Lee Porter.
You affirm that the evidence you shall give in this court and jury in this trial shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
All right, if you could have a seat here to my left, and once you're situated, just pull that microphone down in front, please.
What is your relationship to the Barretts?
I am their housekeeper.
How long have you worked for them?
6 months.
What were your hours?
2 in the morning, 2 p.m. to 10 p.m.
Did you notice problems in their marriage?
Yes.
What kind of problems?
There are a lot of arguing and yelling.
Was Mrs. Barrett behaving unusually in the weeks preceding the shooting?
Yes.
In what ways?
She's been crying a lot.
What time did Mr. Barrett get home the night of the shooting?
9 p.m.
Did he and Mrs. Barrett argue?
A little.
For how long?
I just remember they argued for a little bit.
Did you interrupt them to serve dinner?
Yes.
What happened after dinner?
After dinner,
Where did they go after dinner?
after dinner they went into the dining room and I told them that dinner was served, and they all Mr. Barrett said that he wanted a divorce, and Mrs. Barrett said that he couldn't do that to him. Then Mrs. Barrett left the room, and the next thing I heard were 3 loud noises. And I saw Mr. Barrett come out limping with blood on his arm and his leg. And then saw Mrs. Barrett run out with a gun, and I ran out the kitchen and called 911.
Did you hear Mrs. Barrett threaten Mr. Barrett? What did she say?
She said, "You'll be sorry."
Did you personally see Mrs. Barrett with the gun?
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Very cross.
Is it true that Mr. Barrett had a bad temper, and sometimes when he did not like the way you prepared his dinner, he threw things, isn't it?
Yes.
You once heard Mrs. Barrett scream after an argument with Mr. Barrett, and you did not do anything about it, did you? When you saw Mrs. Barrett with a gun in her hand earlier in the day on December 18th, you didn't do anything about it, did you? Your Honor, I would like to enter Defense Exhibit B. It is the diagram of Barrett's home.
Any objection from the prosecution?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, that will be admitted. Thank you.
The private door that you say Mrs. Barrett earlier in the day, when you saw her with a gun in her hand, is not shown on the diagram of Barrett's home, is it? You didn't actually witness Mrs. Barrett kill Mr. Barrett, did you?
No.
Have you ever been arrested?
I've been on probation before.
Your Honor, I would like to enter Defense Exhibit C into evidence. It is Lee Porter's witness statement.
Any objection from the prosecution?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, that will be admitted.
Just one piece of evidence.
Highlighted.
Can you please read the highlighted section?
Only once did I get arrested back in 1979 because some lady I worked for said I took $100 from her purse. I never did that.
So it is true that you were convicted of petty larceny in October of 1979 for stealing $100 from a lady you worked for, isn't it? Your Honor, I would like to enter Defense Exhibit D. It is the final disposition of the court for the case State v. Lee Porter.
Any objection from the state?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, that will be admitted.
Your Honor, could I highlight this part really quickly?
Sure, go ahead, take your time.
Thank you. Can you please read the highlighted sections to the court?
Plead guilty.
So it would be fair for me to conclude that you pled guilty to a crime that you claim you did not commit. No further questions, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. You can step down. Third witness from the state.
prosecution witness scene change.
Defendant evidence you shall give in this court and jury in this trial shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes.
You'll have a seat here and just pull that microphone down if it's not already. Okay. May I inquire?
How long have you worked for the police force?
7 years.
Do you have experience in any homicides?
Yes.
Did you read the defendant the Miranda warnings?
I believe I did. I need to have it of it.
When did you have her statement taken?
About 30 minutes after arriving at the police station.
Did you force, threaten, or coerce the defendant into giving her statement and signing the confession?
No, she signed of her own free will and indicated it was all true and correct.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right. Cross.
Your Honor, I would like to enter into evidence Exhibit F, or Exhibit E, Seam Cheney's witness statement.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right. That will be admitted.
Please read the highlighted parts.
I would like to call David to read the
My observations and actions at the time are accurately recorded.
Your regular schedule is working from Tuesday through Saturday, but on the night of the shooting, you were patrolling on a Sunday. Is that correct?
That is correct.
You say you normally patrol with a partner, but on the night of the shooting, your partner was sick, correct?
That is correct.
So you were the only officer to witness the scene?
That is correct.
Your Honor, I would like to enter into evidence Exhibit F, the body diagram.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right. So admitted.
Based on this piece of evidence, can you please tell me which leg the deceased was shot in?
It's the right leg.
Your Honor, I would like to enter into evidence Exhibit G, C.M. Cheney's police report.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right. That's admitted.
Yes.
Can you please read highlighted section 3?
He was lying in a pool of blood and appeared to have several bullet wounds on his body, including one to the right back thigh.
Can you please read highlighted section 1?
That's what I just read.
Can you please read highlighted section 3?
The actor shot him again, this time hitting him in the left leg at the eye area.
So could you clarify for the court which leg the deceased was shot in?
He was shot in the right leg.
Is it true that you just read from your police report that the deceased was shot in the left leg?
Yes.
Your Honor, I would like to enter into evidence Exhibit H, the diagram, or I would like to refer to Exhibit B, the diagram of Barrett's house.
Okay.
In Lee Porter's witness statement, she claims to have exited the house through a door in the kitchen. Can you please refer to that door?
I only put the features I felt was important to the case on
not meant to be a perfect room.
Is it true that you found a crumbled pager next to the deceased?
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
I would like to refer to the house diagram. Can you please show me the crumbled pager you found on the house diagram?
Are you referring to the notes?
I'm referring to the crumbled pager.
I think he thought you said page, like notes page. I don't think he's referring to the notes.
Are you referring to
I'm referring, can you please read from your witness statement, highlighted section 2?
The pager, which I removed and tagged as evidence, was found crumpled in his right hand.
Is it true that the couple, Mr. Barrett and Mrs. Barrett, had known each other for 10 years?
yes?
Your Honor, I would like to enter into evidence Exhibit I, the incident report.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, so admitted.
It's Exhibit H.
Okay, so noted.
Please read the highlighted.
Stranger to stranger, the X by yes.
Is it possible for a married couple who originally met 10 years ago that they could somehow possibly be strangers to each other?
I would hope not.
Although you claim to read Miranda rights to all of your suspects, Mrs. Barrett insists that her rights were not read to her. Is it true that you do not have a recollection of reading Barbara her rights?
I believe I read her rights. I make a habit of it.
In your witness statement, which you read earlier, you claim that all of your observations and actions at that time were accurately recorded. However, you have failed to prevail in the statement with all of these inconsistencies. No further questions, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. All right, at this time then, does the prosecution rest?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, sir. You can step down. All right, turning to the defense, does the defense have a witness to call?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
Mansfield Police Department, and it is being instituted in police departments across the country. I have written many books and articles and run a private counseling practice. I have interviewed over 300 battered and abused women and have heard the stories of around 500. I have testified in court before and have been appointed an expert witness.
Your Honor, I ask at this time that you now treat this witness as an expert witness.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, so noted.
What defines a battered woman?
A battered woman is one who is forced into physical or psychological behavior against her will. Battered women are depressed and sad that they cannot better prepare for or avoid the batterings. Battered women are devastated that they cannot make their husband be the man they thought they married or have the man stay with them. Despite these feelings and the repeated battering cycles, battered women truly believe everything will be all right in the end.
What are the phases of the battering cycle?
There are 3 phases to the battering cycle. First, the tensions mount. Second, the abuse and battering occurs. Third is the loving and forgiving phase. During this final phase, the battered woman feels as if she must forgive the man, and so she does until the cycle repeats again.
Your Honor, I would like to enter into evidence Exhibit I, annual bias witness statement.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, so admitted.
Please read the highlighted part of your witness statement to explain why battered women stay in these relationships.
The short periods during which her husband exhibited loving and contrite behavior were sufficient to see her through the initial and acute battering phases.
She basically lived from one of these loving phases to another, doing her best to suppress the knowledge of her husband's cruelty.
How do relationships often end after long periods of battering?
Battering couples will either separate or kill each other.
Have you met with Mrs. Barrett before?
Yes, I have interviewed Mrs. Barrett 3 times, all after the shooting.
Do you believe that Mrs. Barrett is a battered woman?
Yes, Mrs. Barrett suffered extreme abuse from her husband and was under an enormous amount of stress. She had no sense of security in her own home and lived in constant fear because she never knew when her husband could strike.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, Cross.
Can you say this defendant suffered from being abused?
Yes,
Do you have any evidence of the defendant being a battered woman other than just her say-so?
no.
I would like to refer to Exhibit I and have her read the evidence. Please read the 2 highlighted sentences.
When her husband told her he was leaving, it unleashed a floodgate of fury that had built up for years. She saw it as a betrayal of her every effort to placate and pacify him into staying with her in the marriage.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. You can step down. Second witness from the defense.
The defense would like to call their second witness, Barrett Barrett, to the stand.
Affirming that the evidence has been given in this court and the jury in this trial should be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
Yes.
So please state who you are for the court.
My name is Barbara Allen Barrett, and I'm 47 years old.
How did you and John meet?
We met about 10 years ago at an alumni function for Vassar College.
Describe your relationship with John.
2 days after we met, we began seeing each other every day for 6 months. John was usually a loving and compassionate man, but there were times when he would become abusive and violent. And once, when he did not come home and it was after midnight, I drove to his office and found him cheating on me with another woman.
Were there any serious abusive situations?
Around 1 week before his death, he came home extremely drunk and took off his belt and started to hit me with it. I knew he was trying to kill me.
How did you and John manage to stay together after this abusive cycle?
As soon as his anger had passed, he became the loving man I knew he was. I saw how much he really needed me, so I forgave him and I agreed to take him back.
How was John acting when he came home on the night of his death?
He had come home very late, and when I asked why, he said it was none of my business. Later, he told me he wanted the divorce and was leaving that night.
Do you ever know why he wanted a divorce?
No, he never told me.
Did John threaten you in any way that night?
As we were talking about the issue, John told me to go in the other room because I was crying too much. He then came into the room where I was with the belt in his hand. I thought he was going to choke and kill me. The police came soon after that.
Was anybody else in the house on the night of the shooting?
Yes, my housekeeper, Lee Porter. But I wouldn't believe anything she has to say, because on the day of John's death, I caught her stealing money from John's private drawers.
What happened after the police came?
They took me to the police station, and I gave them my statement.
Did they ever review your rights?
No, at no time did they read or tell me what my rights were. After I gave them my statement, they told me I could call my lawyer. My lawyer told me not to say anything until she got there. If I knew I didn't have to give a statement, then I wouldn't have.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, Cross.
Did John tell you why he wanted a divorce?
Objection, Your Honor. Asked and answered.
Overruled.
Your Honor, the prosecution would like to enter into evidence Exhibit J, confession with the officer's warning.
2.
Would you please read the first highlighted section?
He told me he wanted a divorce and that he wanted to marry someone else. I don't remember much of anything after seeing him come into the living room.
Can you explain this inconsistency? Did John ever abuse you while he was sober?
No.
Was John sober the night of his death?
Yes, he was.
After you poured yourself a glass of wine, what did John do?
I don't remember.
After you went into the living room, what did John do?
After I went into the living room, John came in with a belt in his hand, and I thought he was going to choke and kill me.
I would like you to again refer to Exhibit J, confession with officer's warnings. Would you please read the second highlighted portion?
I don't remember much of anything after seeing him come into the living room.
Can you explain this inconsistency?
No.
You have the financial means to leave your husband, if you so chose.
Yes.
But you were willing to sacrifice your physical and emotional well-being to stay with Mr. Barrett.
Yes, I loved him, and I could never leave him.
And after everything you had given up for him, when you found out he was leaving you, were you upset?
Yes.
After everything you had sacrificed, this was the last straw, wasn't it?
Maybe.
And you don't remember anything after John came into the living room.
No, I was too upset.
So it's possible that you could have killed him, and you just don't remember it.
Maybe, yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. You may step down. All right, is that the extent of the evidence from the defense then?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, show for the record then the defense rests. That's the end of evidence. We'll proceed to closing arguments. Normally the prosecution would go first, but my thing says the defense. Is that right? The defense first? Okay, I want to make sure it wasn't a typo. All right, closing argument from the defense then.
Yes, sir.
May it please the court. Barbara Barrett is a loyal, forgiving wife who did all she could to please her unfaithful husband. After much provocation and abuse from her beloved spouse, her sense of security was shattered, and she lived in constant fear of her personal well-being. Mrs. Barrett has been charged with murdering her husband, John Walker Barrett. Murder is defined by the South Carolina state statutes as the killing of another person with malice aforethought. Malice, as defined by the case State v. Johnson, is the intent to injure another and indicates a wicked or depraved spirit intent on doing wrong. Psychologist Dave McGuire testified that she believes Mrs. Barrett is a classic example of a battered woman caught in a battering relationship with her abusive husband, John. Mrs. Barrett had suffered severe abuse at the hands of her husband and lived in fear of when his next violent outburst would occur. Mrs. Barrett testified that John had been abusive throughout their relationship. She stated that 1 week before the shooting, John had beaten her with a belt, and she believed that her life was in danger. Mrs. Barrett also testified that on the evening of December 18th, after arguing at dinner, Mr. Barrett had come into the living room with a belt in his hands, and she believed that he was going to choke her and kill her. Mrs. Barrett shot her husband in self-defense because she believed that she needed to protect herself because he was going to kill her that night. Mrs. Barrett also testified that she was not read her Miranda rights prior to giving her statement to the police. She stated that she would not have given her statement if she had known that she did not have to talk to the police. Mrs. Barrett stated that her housekeeper, Lee Porter, was not to be trusted because she caught Lee stealing money from Mr. Barrett's drawer. Lee Porter testified that Mr. Barrett had a temper, and if he did not like the way his dinner was cooked, he would throw things. Lee Porter was the Barrett's housekeeper, but she did not seem to be very concerned with Mrs. Barrett's safety. She stated that she heard Mrs. Barrett scream after an argument with Mr. Barrett, but she did not do anything about it, and she also did nothing when she saw Mrs. Barrett come into a house with a gun earlier in the day of the shooting. Lee Porter was convicted of the crime of petty larceny after being accused of stealing $100 from a former employer. In the case State v. Chastain, it was determined that in South Carolina, if a witness had previously committed a crime involving moral delinquency, then that witness's testimony would be rendered unworthy of belief. The case State v. Millings found that in order for the prior conviction to be admissible in court, the conviction must have been a crime of moral turpitude. According to the South Carolina case of State v. Corn, the crime of larceny is a crime of moral turpitude. So we asked the jury, consider the trustworthiness of the testimony given by Lee Porter. Officer Cheney was sloppy in his investigation into the death of John Walker Barrett. According to Officer Cheney, he had the training that should have prepared him for investigating this type of crime, although his work that night does not show it. His house diagram leaves out a door, which Lee Porter refers to in her testimony. Officer Cheney shows an inconsistency in his own witness statement regarding the location of John Walker Barrett's leg wound. According to Officer Cheney, he doesn't remember reading Mrs. Barrett her Miranda rights before taking her statement. In the case Miranda v. Arizona, it is shown that the state properly has the burden to demonstrate knowing and intelligent waiver of privilege against self-incrimination and right to counsel. Because Officer Cheney does not remember reading Mrs. Barrett her Miranda rights, and Mrs. Barrett states that she was not read her Miranda rights, the defense believes that Mrs. Barrett's confession, given on December 18th, should be disregarded because it was obtained involuntarily. According to the case Jackson v. Deno, it is stated to the jury that if a confession was involuntary, the jury is to disregard it entirely and to determine the question of guilt from other evidence. Joe May, the medical examiner who examined Mr. Barrett's body after the shooting, was yet another prosecution witness who did his job carelessly. May stated in the record of the medical examiner that the manner of Mr. Barrett's death was natural, and later stated that the cause of Mr. Barrett's death was a gunshot wound to the back of the head. This evidence leads anyone to ask themselves, how could a gunshot wound to the back of the head be a natural cause of death? The burden of proof ultimately does not lie with our client. The burden of proof lies completely with the state. The prosecution has not presented sufficient evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that our client, Mrs. Barrett, is a woman with a wicked and depraved spirit whose intent was to murder her husband. Instead, they presented testimony from a dishonest housekeeper, along with a doctor and police officer who did not complete their jobs in this case to the best of their abilities. The defense has shown you that Mrs. Barrett was a loving wife who lived in fear of her abusive husband. On the night of December 18, 1988, Mrs. Barrett was only trying to protect herself against her monster of a husband who was intent on killing her. We ask this court to find Barbara Barrett not guilty of murder.
All right, thank you. Closing arguments then on behalf of the prosecution.
May it please the court, your honor, and ladies and gentlemen of the jury. This is a case which examines the irrefutable fact that the value of human life cannot be diminished, no matter the circumstances. John Walker Barrett was brutally murdered in his own home on December 18, 1988. All of the evidence clearly points to the defendant, his wife, Barbara Allen Barrett. Malice aforethought, a crucial element of murder, has been shown through evidence, including the Tootsie letter, and a testimonial showing that the defense had been practicing with a gun beforehand. A witness saw, before alerting the police, Barbara Barrett chase after her wounded husband, gun in hand. The medical examiner testified that the deceased had been shot 5 times, including twice in the back while he was most likely running away, and fatally in the back of the head while he was lying face down on the floor. The defendant herself did not deny this atrocity, as she claims not to remember many of the night's events. This was clearly not a case of self-defense, as the defendant shot Mr. Barrett as he was running away from her, and it was completely unjustifiable. We ask the court to consider that although Lee Porter was convicted of petite larceny, it was almost 10 years ago, which does not reflect on her moral status now. Through documentary and testimonial evidence, we have fulfilled the burden of proof and shown beyond reasonable doubt that the defendant, Barbara Allen Barrett, committed the murder of John Walker Barrett. As anything less would diminish the value of human life, we urge the court to convict the defendant guilty of murder.
Okay, thank you. That concludes the trial then. We will be in recess for about 5 to 10 minutes.
All rise. The court is now in recess.